Hey there, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast and the saddest Monday morning you have ever experienced. That's right, it is the final weekly recap show for the 2018 NFL season. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why can't we still have weekly recap shows even when there are no games on during the offseason? I know. I am totally with you, and I argued pretty convincingly to the big guys upstairs that we should keep this going all year. But apparently the literal definition of recap is, quote, a brief description of the main points of something that has happened. So therefore, I've been told that a Sunday night recap show, when there are no actual games to recap, would, quote, defeat the very purpose of the show. As Rod Burgundy would say, agree to disagree, but nevertheless, my good buddy Mike Tagliere is here with me to finish our personal season in style. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, we did it, buddy. We made it through the season. How is your Week 16?
Oh, my Week 16 is a mixed bag, man. There were definitely some good calls in there. A lot of people asking me about like whether or not they should have been playing Sony Michel this week over guys like, Tariq Cohen, and I made some good calls and stuff like that. But then there were also times where it was just like, this whole John Kelly, CJ Anderson thing. I'm going to take the L on that one. And I was upfront about it. I did say that, this was pure speculation. I had no idea, but I just didn't feel like CJ Anderson would walk in, with 3 days practice with the team and just steal the job away from John Kelly, who'd been with the team all year. But that's apparently what happened.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. We might get into that at some point during today. But yeah, Tags, I don't know, buddy. We've been doing fantasy, obviously, for a very long time. Can you recall a situation like this in the championship week where, legitimately, this is the number one player in all of fantasy. You have crazy conflicting reports all week, right? I'm not practicing, but I feel like I'm going to do well. On Saturday, there's the tweet by Schefter that there's optimism that he's going to play. On Sunday morning, there's more optimism that he's going to play, and then he's going to be out. And his backup for most of the year that people have stashed, Malcolm Brown, went out with an injury. John Kelly was the guy that everybody then stashed. They signed CJ Anderson off the street, which we assume is for depth. Then there are reports that CJ Anderson might be the number one guy behind Gurley. And then, in fact, and it's a late game, by the way, to boot, so you basically hamstrings all owners. And then CJ Anderson plays and has an absolutely dominant fantasy performance. It was, to me, it was unparalleled. And I, as an analyst, and you basically brought it up, it was such a bind because it was like unprecedented. I had absolutely no idea what to recommend to people in that situation.
Yeah, no, it was really rough. And that's the thing, is just like, and there was like special circumstances too. And the fact that he played an afternoon game that they did say that he was expected to play. But if you guys tuned in for the live show this morning, I had said this had the weird feel of like the Melvin Gordon injury, that knee game, and then he re-injured it. And I'm like, for a Rams team going to the playoffs, this just makes no sense. I never thought that Todd Gurley was going to play in this game. Unfortunately, I still felt like John Kelly was going to be the more productive back. I did say they would both be usable, but I also said that I wouldn't start him over some guys like Mark Ingram. I said I'd play Mark Ingram over them. I'd play Damian Williams over them. So, David Johnson, just because you want to get away from as much uncertainty as possible in championship games. You want to like the guaranteed workload. So I didn't feel comfortable with Kelly or Anderson, but I'm just the type of person where all I wish is just that I felt more confident about Anderson. That's what I keep going back to. But unfortunately, there was no way we could predict that.
I've legitimately can't remember the last time we saw a guy walk in off the street and just put in this kind of performance. For me, as we got closer to the games, and we were talking about this off air, I was in the position. I had friends who were in the position. They were texting me what they should do, and it was very much of a low floor, high ceiling play because I would not have been surprised if Anderson got the start. And frankly, right off the bat, he missed a pass protection. I think it was the first drive. He just let a guy go right by him, and I was like, well, maybe this is it. But no, he's stuck in there. But it was a low floor. A buddy of mine was in a close match, but he was looking really good just based on the early games. He really just needed something, and it was that exact person, Mark Ingram, who you mentioned. And for me, I was like, no, I'd go Ingram, and I wouldn't hesitate because you just need your points. You don't need a home run play here. You just need kind of a high floor. And so Anderson was kind of the opposite of that. He was a low floor, high ceiling play. He did hit the high ceiling, but it was really difficult for fantasy owners overall, and kind of embodied this entire season, which has been just sort of avoiding minefields overall. So we will get to that and more, but here's the deal. Usually what we do on the show is we break down the game action and we give our rapid reaction, and then we'll talk about what it means going forward. But other than the really small percentage of you who play into Week 17, there is no more going forward for the 2018 NFL season. So frankly, I have zero plan for this show. We're going to touch on Week 17 a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means for next season. I don't know. We're going to make it up as we go because as history has proven, you cannot go wrong by not preparing whatsoever because that is just great. It's going to be amazing.
We can always talk about like the dynasty, like who had the biggest dynasty impacts as the seasons went on. We could hit that on each team or something like that. I think that'd be fun.
You know what, buddy? I'm just gonna throw it up to you when we get there, and you can do what you want because you're the brains behind this whole operation. Before we get into it, I do want to remind everyone about our latest giveaway, which is the signed David Johnson Cardinals helmet. You can submit an entry just by going to fantasypros.com/contest, which will tell you exactly what to do, which is to leave a review for the podcast on iTunes, positive or negative, and then just screenshot it and send your review to contest@fantasypros.com. All right, Tags, it was a big day. I mean, what do you want to do? What did you find most interesting today, Tags, or what's your biggest takeaway? Whatever you got.
My biggest takeaway is that I found out like late. I didn't find out until for whatever reason this week. We're so wrapped up in our work. I don't even know where I stand in most of my leagues. Somebody asked me, they're like, Mike, if you're 17 leagues, how many championships are you in? I'm like, I have no idea. I just kind of go through and I set my lineups on Sundays, and I hadn't really counted. But then I saw on my timeline today that you were towards the top of the Scott Fish Bowl. And for those who don't know what that is, it was a tournament this year of both analysts and fans that were invited in, and it's like all about charity. Scott Fish puts this on every year. It's awesome. All the toys they get for kids based on like all the donations and everything. It's just so much. And so in this tournament, there's 720 teams. Dan, I know that you're going to finish in the top two. I looked at the score right now. It looks like you might finish second, but you still have an outside chance at number one. You are actually in the lead as we speak right now of 720 teams. Like, this is ridiculous. Congrats, dude.
Thanks, buddy. And I just want to make it clear, it was actually more like 900 teams. The stats on the Scott Fish Bowl are for last year, which means it was actually even more this year. It was about 900 teams. Yeah, it's been a crazy season, and it's mostly luck, as you can see. And again, to reiterate, the most important thing is Scott Fish is one of the best people in our industry, and he raises a ton of money for charity. But yeah, it looks like I probably will come up short, and part of the reason is because I did not go with CJ Anderson, who I was able to pick up and put on my bench, but I could not pull the trigger. But I do appreciate that. I do not think that is the most interesting thing we can find from today, Tags, but I really do appreciate it. So why don't we just get into the games and we can go from there. Let's start with yesterday's games. The Titans 25, the Redskins 16, one of the biggest gambling implications at the end of the game with a pick six right as time expired. Marcus Mariota left the game with a stinger. In his stead, Blaine Gabbert throws a short touchdown pass. But let us talk about Derrick Henry, who has kind of been the guy who everybody has been talking about for the last few weeks. Not quite the monster effort that we have seen the last few weeks, but plenty serviceable. 21 carries, 84 yards, and a touchdown, plus he catches a pass for 8 yards. How about that? Now, he's under contract for one more season with the Titans. What do you expect from him next year? Is he going to be this type of strong, reliable? I mean, I'm sure you're not going to say, oh, he's a top 5 back or anything like that, but like, are you feel like he's going to be a strong RB2 next year or what?
That's funny. Is I was actually going to ask you the question is where you would rank him. And I had someone ask me the other day on a podcast if I would draft Derrick Henry as a top 15 running back next year. And my answer is no. I do feel like Tennessee's defense is going to be good. They have a good young defense. They drafted a lot of guys. The linebacking core is like totally revamped. The cornerback position could be better, but at the same time, it's a good defense. So you figure they're going to be able to run the ball quite a bit. They had all 5 of their starting offensive linemen return this year, so you figured that they were going to be good. Unfortunately, there were some busts on that offensive line this year. Mariota has been, rather inconsistent. I don't even know if he's the quarterback of their future. I think they have to start like looking at that question and saying, is he the answer for our franchise? And if not, what are we going to do moving forward? So, I mean, Derrick Henry, I said that I'd probably have him in that 18 to 20 range of running backs where I still feel like it's going to be somewhat game script dependent. And if the Titans are losing or fall behind, Derrick Henry is not going to get, 20 plus touches a game, and he's going to be very volatile. I don't think he moves into the elite territory. I see him as maybe a late third, 4th round pick next year. I was going to ask you the same about Corey Davis. So how do you feel about those guys next year?
I think with Henry, I'm probably about where you are. I do think that he's probably going to have this trajectory, perhaps not as extreme as he had this year, where he's going to be much more valuable later on in the season, whether that's an organizational philosophy, and they had a different coach this year, of course. But in the end, when you get down towards the last half of the season or quarter of the season, these guys are tired, man, and it's cold, and you got that big body running at you, and you just do not want to tackle him, and so they were able to lean on it. But there is certainly kind of a mid-tier to low-tier RB2, and look, if this is what it's going to be, if the guy is going to be someone who's getting between 20 and 30 touches a game, then great. I'd feel much more confident in that. But I don't feel like this is really something where they're going to look at and be like, you know what, we had a lot of success, so let's just stick with that formula, because I really don't think. And speaking of why, we do not know exactly what the situation is going to be. I was going to ask you about Mariota. I'll talk about Davis in a second. But Mariota with another injury-plagued season, he's got so much potential, but I was really wondering what you think of his future. I'll answer the Davis question first. I love Corey Davis as a talent, without question. And for dynasty formats, I feel pretty strong. I'm not certain that next year is really going to be the year that he's going to develop, mainly because I just don't have faith in Mariota, assuming that he's a starting quarterback, right? I mean, he's an exciting player, and if he could stay healthy, I think he would do a lot of good for franchise, but mostly with his legs. I mean, he's just not overly accurate. He doesn't have great arm strength. So as a whole, Corey Davis, I mean, he's very talented, and because he's so young, I would feel pretty bullish on him in dynasty formats, but I wouldn't exactly feel too excited about him next year unless there's some major change,
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one, and it's really weird because this was like the first full year we got to see Mariota with Corey Davis, but then you had, Mariota in and out of the lineup with the arm issues, whatever. I don't think that he's the long-term solution, personally. I mean, they are going to give him at least another year, so you're going to be tied to Corey Davis. So I kind of feel like it's an Amari Cooper situation where the upside, but you're going to have these massive ups and downs. His schedule is going to be tough in the division they play in. So for me, he's probably going to be ranked as maybe like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Figure he takes a small step forward, but understand that you're still going to have the ups and downs.
Yeah, no, I'm inclined to agree with that. Again, we can't tell exactly now. A lot of things change in the offseason, but for now, yeah, that's about where I'd be. I mean, he's great to watch, and when things are going right, it's great. But you had a lot of inconsistency from him this year, and unless if Mariota's back, I'd kind of expect the same thing next year, with probably a little bit better than we saw this year overall, but generally the same thing. Long term, though, I do feel like eventually the talent almost always wins out, and they'll find a good situation for him. But as for next year, I'm basically borderline wide receiver 2 is probably what I'm thinking there. But the Redskins, I mean, you had a big effort from Adrian Peterson with, the city collapsing around him. He puts up 26 for 119. Great effort from him. I'm really not sure what the big takeaways are here, especially long-term from anybody on the Redskins, but anything stick out to you?
No, not really. Peterson, I'm not going to draft him next year. I'll let somebody else jump on that grenade. As for the quarterback situation, we have no idea if Alex Smith's going to be able to play at the start of the year. We don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be, so it's unfair to speculate. Josh Doxson, I just don't feel like anybody on this team right now, I think, that you can say confidently going forward that they're going to be a fantasy, something on your team you want to hold on to that I wouldn't trade away. I would trade away Jamison Crowder if I could, just because his role has been inconsistent, his health's been inconsistent. Josh Doxson has been like a touchdown or bust guy throughout his entire career. He has a quarterback in Alex Smith that doesn't like to throw into tight coverage. Peterson is at the end of his career. Chris Thompson's at the end of his career. This team is seriously crumbling. So I don't Jordan Reed, who wants to own him in anything? So yeah, I mean, if you own any Redskins, dynasty shares, I'd probably sell them away if I could, but if you play in a competitive league, I'm assuming you won't be able to sell them for much.
Yeah, I can't really think of anybody at all on the Redskins that I'm really interested in dynasty right now at the moment. I mean, it's just, frankly, I guess I do want to say kudos to Jay Gruden for keeping this team as competitive as he did.
Yeah, I could agree.
Right? I mean, they just had nothing going on. Their offensive line was completely decimated. They were on their 4th string quarterback at this point who barely knew the system, and he kept them involved. So kudos to him. But as for long-term impact, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, I guess, Peterson has certainly shown enough that somebody, whether it's the Redskins or, somebody else, will probably give him a job next year. But I'm not going to have too much interest. Eventually, his body's got to break down, I assume. I mean, he is superhuman, but we'll have to see about that. Ravens 22, Chargers 10. Just an outstanding job by the Ravens here. Honestly, their defense played extraordinarily well on the road. And frankly, I mean, we really just take a minute and appreciate the coaching staff. I know Harbaugh, was told he's going to be around for a while, which is great. But I mean, to completely change the offensive scheme midway through the season, they knew this was coming. So they Marty Morningway had experience doing this and everything like that. But the fact is that they went from Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson and ran a completely different offensive scheme and succeeded. And it's really a pretty impressive job. But let's talk about Jackson. Kind of a pedestrian fantasy effort here, 13 for 39 on the ground, plus 12 completions, 204 yards, and a touchdown through the air. What do you see his future like as both an NFL and fantasy quarterback?
It's tough to say, just because like we don't know how it's going to be with an entire offseason to learn the offense. Like, so basically with the way this week shapes out and like how you're going to look at it afterwards, Lamar Jackson's probably going to finish in right around QB 11, QB 12 when all is said and done. And that's where he's been every single game. But every single game he has started, he's finished in between the QB 11 and QB 15. So it's like he's giving you those high end QB 2 numbers. I think people, even in dynasty formats, some people overvalued his rushing ability just because people are looking back to Michael Vick. They're looking back to Tim Tebow and these guys that were able to post QB1 numbers because the passing numbers back then weren't as inflated. If you were to get 16, 17 points out of a quarterback, it was considered good. Nowadays, in today's NFL, 16 fantasy points, like legitimately all year, it's been right around the QB 17, 16 range, and that's not great. So it's like, he needs to improve his passing. He looked better in this game against a really good Chargers defense, but he has a long way to go. I feel like he's, next year going into a redraft format, I would say Lamar Jackson's probably going to be safe to draft as like a low-end QB1 just because he offers you a high floor every single week, and that's hard to find.
Who do you think the starting running back will be for the Ravens next season?
Actually, it's funny. Somebody asked me that today, and I don't think it's Gus Edwards. I don't know if the running back's in the roster, to be honest with you. It might be Kenneth Dixon. They seem to like him an awful lot coming back from injury, suspension. Like, they keep giving him chances, so they obviously like him. But it wouldn't shock me if the running back's not on the roster right now, to be honest. And this is a team that lacks really like game-changing options at either running back or wide receiver. So they're gonna have to add some flash to this offense somehow. So I unfortunately don't think it's Gus Edwards.
What about Dixon?
It's possible. Again, I think they like him. I really do, because like he's a guy that was suspended for an entire year, and then he came back, and then like was injured, and then was hurt again. And it's like, okay, at what point do they move on from that guy, right? Like he's going to be inactive, right? No, he's playing over Javorius Buck Allen. He's playing over Ty Montgomery. So I think they really do like Dixon, and I think it's a very good possibility he is the starter because he offers more in the passing game than Gus Edwards. He has the entire year to kind of essentially learn the running back they want him to be. Hey, we want you to run downhill, don't dance behind the line of scrimmage. And that's fine for Dixon because he's a guy that can break tackles more than Gus Edwards, who is just a flat-out downhill runner that doesn't do anything special.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, if I'm guessing, I think it would be Dixon. And they really incorporated him a lot yesterday. Edwards ran pretty well, although it was largely the product of a couple of big runs. He had 14 carries for 92 yards. He did catch a pass for 13 yards, which the
first one.
Right. I pretty much fainted when I saw it. But Dixon, had, 8 carries for 28 yards plus 2 catches for 20 yards. I think they like him. I think they want him to be the guy if he can. So if he can just sort of, stay clean and keep going with this. And again, like you said, in this system with Lamar Jackson, and that's why Gus Edwards was so successful, it's because you don't want the guy who dances. You want the guy who's going to run forward. That's what you want. Be a downhill runner. And if Dixon can sort of understand that coming to next year, I do think he will be the guy. On the other side of the ball, Chargers, just a really bad game offensively. Out of curiosity, Baltimore defense played great, but Melvin Gordon did not look healthy to me. Did he look good to you?
It looked a little bad, but the thing is, Baltimore does that to a lot of running backs. So going into this one, I felt like it was going to be a lesser performing game. I think I had Melvin Gordon as my RB10. I didn't love him in this game. Scoring a touchdown obviously saved his fantasy day. But no, he didn't look completely right. And hopefully that's just, again, a product of the defense and not necessarily him. But this is just more on the passing game, man. Phillip Rivers and that offense, nothing. They couldn't even keep it competitive. I have no idea why Mike Williams disappears when Keenan Allen's back in the lineup. No idea. I've been saying this all year.
Allen didn't do anything either. He got a couple of garbage time catches, but 5 for 58. He did have a couple wiped out by penalties, unfortunately. But yeah, they just couldn't do anything at all.
But it's been a question I've been asking all year. It's whenever you watch, if you were to sit down, so NFL Game Pass, if you guys wanted to still use that in the offseason, it's a neat tool. You could click and just search by a player. And I want you guys to do this if you have Game Pass. Type in Mike Williams and go watch every single target. You could organize it and it'll just show you his targets. And if you do that, you'll see that this guy, legitimately, when he's throwing the ball, it's just he just looks bigger and better and stronger than the DBs every single time. And to see 3 or 4 targets a game makes just no sense, especially when you drafted him with was it the number 7 overall pick in that draft? So I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Yeah, he is a beast. I imagine they will incorporate him more starting next year, but
And they have Hunter Henry coming back then too.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. But again, at some point, what is the point of taking him if you're not going to, make him...
That's my point, yeah.
I know, make him a focal point. So Certainly for long term, we'll have to see how that bears out. If you do play into Week 17, the Chargers do play the Broncos, and frankly, if the Chiefs win tonight, and I believe that would lock up the division for them, my guess would be Melvin Gordon would sit next week. So if you do play into Week 17, just watch out for that. Browns 26, Bengals 18. The final score a lot closer than the game was. Baker Mayfield, excellent. Once again, 27 of 37 for 283 yards and 3 touchdowns. What do you think Baker's going to be next year drafted for a fantasy quarterback?
He's going to be drafted borderline QB1. He's going to be in the range of the guys like Mitch Trubisky. I think you're going to see him in that area of the rankings where it's like people don't want to draft him for an every week starter, but if you want to pair him with someone else, I don't have any issue with that. I actually was working on my dynasty rankings just yesterday because I'm going to put out a dynasty trade value chart I think on the 1st of the year, 1st or 2nd of January. But I moved Baker up to my number 6 dynasty quarterback, and I've liked him for a long time. I had him at number 10 when the year started, and he's basically just showing me like everything that he did in college, and he's slowly getting better and better. But I do want to take a second because I have ragged on some people for some like subpar play and stuff on, off the field, whatever. I like Baker's. I feel like his cockiness is part of what makes him good. But at the same time, what he did today to Hugh Jackson, did you see it?
No, I didn't see it, actually.
Basically, Baker, he threw, it turned out to be a long pass to like basically seal up the game. And it wasn't a touchdown, but it was a really long one. The entire time he's running down the field after the play, he's staring at Hugh Jackson. He's spinning around and then turns back, staring at Jackson. And just like, it was just very arrogant. And like, I understand it, even if it's the first time, but we've already heard you talk about Hugh Jackson in the press. Like, we already know that you don't like him. We get it. But today it was just like immaturity, too much Baker. Like, I like Baker, and I actually liked what you see is what you get. But at the same time, this was too far.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fair. I haven't seen it, but from what you're describing, I did see something on Twitter, about basically the incident that you're describing, but I didn't actually see it myself. Yeah, I mean, there really is no need for that. But that kind of is what he is at this point, and he is, what, 22?
He's young, 23.
Yeah, he's young. I mean, tags, I don't know about you, that was like a lifetime ago for me, so I think back to what I was like back then, and there are a lot of things I probably, did that I'm like, well, maybe I could have handled that a little better, and my guess is that as Mayfield gets older, he will think the same way, but talent-wise, he's certainly been incredibly, incredibly impressive for his rookie season, and with an entire offseason where he'll come in being the starter, I think the Browns are in for an exciting season next year.
I think they're going to add a wide receiver to this offseason, whether it be the draft or free agency. I think they need him a number 1. Like having Brashad Perriman, Rashard Higgins, Antonio Callaway kind of mixing and matching. I don't think that's the combination that they want.
I certainly hope that they spend some time figuring out how to better utilize Jarvis Landry, because he really, right? He just kind of, another pedestrian effort here with 8 targets, but 4 catches for 47 yards.
He chucked a ball down the field though. Like
he did
that ball. Like he had a bomb. Like that was better than like any Josh Allen throw I've seen all season.
Yeah, we got a good backup quarterback at least, but we'll see what they do there. On the other side of the ball, look, I'm not sure there's much takeaways that we could give for a team playing without Andy Dalton, AJ Green, or Tyler Boyd. CJ Uzomah and John Ross do find the end zone, but is there anything you want to talk about here on the Bengals side?
This is a team that is, understand if you're playing in Dynasty, this is a team whose value can change drastically. You see John Ross and you think he's a bust, and granted, he has been. He's clearly not a number 1 in an offense, but this is a team where Dynasty values will change like extremely fast. And the reason I say that is because they will have a new head coach next year. There is no way that Marvin Lewis makes it through this. There's no way that they hire Hugh Jackson. I cannot believe Cincinnati would be that dumb. So I do anticipate them getting a new coach this offseason, and that, as we've seen with like the Bears franchise and the Rams franchise, like coaching changes can mean a lot. It might not be perfect. Like look at the Cardinals, right? But I'm saying that it really can't get any worse than what we've seen under Marvin Lewis.
Yeah, I really like your optimism, and I certainly hope you're right, but not in terms of what the outlook would be with a new coach, just whether or not there will be a new coach, because essentially you could replay that statement that you just made for each of the last 5 seasons at this point. So I'm sure this has to be the breaking point, but Lewis certainly looked like he was out the door several times already. So I assume it is going to be this time, and I also assume that it is not going to be Hugh Jackson who takes over despite those reports. And again, basically to reiterate what you said, yeah, it's the value of everyone on this franchise could be entirely different depending on who the next head coach is. So you can wait for that in the offseason. Cowboys 27, Bucks 20. Cowboys clinch the NFC East. Kind of a disappointing day here for the Dallas offense. I mean, Dak throws for a touchdown and runs for another, but Ezekiel Elliott just 109 total yards, which for him is kind of disappointing. Amari Cooper just 20 yards receiving. Kind of expected a little more from this one. You know what I mean?
Oh, I completely understand what you mean. Like looking at the Tampa Bay defense, they had allowed at least 106 yards rushing to 5 straight teams of running backs. And then you see Ezekiel Elliott and the Cowboys rush for 80 yards on 24 carries. It was definitely a lackluster day. And especially for those that played DFS, if you paid up for Ezekiel Elliott like I did, you're not very happy with that result. And even Amari Cooper, like 5 targets, 4 catches, 20 yards. I mean, he did what he could with what he could. But again, it was a very low volume game for the Cowboys. And that was what I actually talked about in the primer this week, saying that my concern was that Prescott might throw the ball 25 to 28 times. And I felt like that was going to be because Ezekiel Elliott was killing the Bucs. Unfortunately, their defense got a touchdown in this game, and the other ones were just, a rushing by Dak Prescott and passing, to Michael Gallup. So it's where are you at on Amari Cooper next year? We've obviously seen the extremes in his performances, but knowing that he went to a new team in the middle of the season and how expectations should have been limited, for sure, but seeing the way that he has flashed with Dak Prescott, we do have an upcoming defense, we have a phenomenal run game. How do you view Amari Cooper next year? Like, would you draft him as a wide receiver 2 in the 3rd or 4th round?
Oh, yeah, without question for me, at least right now. And again, I have not yet, even begun to think about my rankings for next season. But yeah, I mean, I was wondering whether or not we were going to talk about, borderline wide receiver 1 territory, because in the back of my mind, and I guess when I think about the top 12 receivers, maybe he falls just outside of that. But yeah, a strong wide receiver 2 for me. I have very little reason to doubt him. I think, really what he did, and I know he's had a couple of clunkers here lately, but really what he did walking into a new team in the middle of the season, I said it when he was traded. I said, no, I get it. Everybody's excited by this, but to learn a new system in the middle of the season. Now, I get he had 2 weeks technically, right? Because he had the back-to-back bye weeks, so great. But still, it's incredibly impressive with an entire offseason around him. It's still not the perfect situation, again, because exactly what you say, strong defense, lean on the running game a lot. It's not something where they're going to be throwing a ton, where he's going to constantly have these big games. But without question, 3rd or 4th round, I'll sign up for that any day of the week.
Fair. I mean, that's the thing. I like it too. And once you get outside the elite tier of wide receivers, there's like 8 receivers I think you could feel comfortable with, like knowing that they're going to give you wide receiver 1 production almost every week. Amari's right after that group.
I know. I completely agree with you. I have very little reservations about going with him next year, at least as I sit here today. On the other side of the ball for the Bucs, Deshaun Jackson returns, but just 1 catch for 24 yards, and I believe he left again with an injury. Jameis Winston throws for 336 yards and a score. Mike Evans, 90 yards and a score. What do you think the Bucs look like next year? There was a report today that it's possible that Dirk Cutter could be retained. I can't imagine that, but what do you think, if anything, the value of the Bucs fantasy players looks like next year in terms of what they've been this year?
I just don't know if there's enough head coaches out there that are like available that NFL teams feel great about. And I think that's why we're starting to hear some of these teams talking about retaining their coaches, like Dirk Cutter, like Dan Quinn. Like when you start talking about the Browns job, about the Packers job, those are more attractive jobs. You know what I mean? Where if you get an offensive mind that wants to become a coach, those are definitely more appealing teams, than to a team that, I think they're going to be moving forward with Jameis Winston. And I think that's the right play. I mean, I think he has flashed at times. He looks dominant at times. He looks bad at others, but he's a gunslinger. That's what he is. You don't try and change him. You have to play better defense is what you have to do, so he doesn't have to take as many chances. You have to build the offensive line because it's been crap for a long time. This is another team where it's very difficult to talk about because I think Deshaun Jackson's gone. Does Chris Godwin start to eat into Mike Evans' elite territory? Is Adam Humphries for real? O.J. Howard was great when he was playing. There's a lot of talent on this team. Ronald Jones, are they going to get him involved next year? Have they already chalked that up as a loss? I don't think so. I think Ronald Jones is one of the better buy lows in dynasty football right now because he costs you nothing. And that's the thing. I will trade, if you have a high 3rd round pick, a late 2nd round pick, I would trade it for Ronald Jones at the chance that he's part of this elite offense with so many playmakers and a team that they can build the offensive line in this year's draft. I don't think they're going to be drafting a quarterback. I just think there's too much talent in this roster for a running back not to score points. And that's the thing. I usually chase my running backs that are attached to high-scoring offenses. So I don't think Peyton Barber is the solution, and I think they have to at least find out what they have in Ronald Jones.
Yeah, 100% agree there, actually. I do kind of, I mean, bullish would be the wrong word, but I would certainly be looking to acquire Ronald Jones in dynasty formats if I can with the current price, because, again, it is not going to be Peyton Barber, and there are a lot of really good offensive pieces. They're going to put up points. You do want pieces of those offenses, just like Tag said. So Ronald Jones is definitely somebody who I'd be looking at in dynasty, assuming that you can get him at the cost that Tags basically said right there. Vikings 27, Lions 9. Look, Tags and I have been pounding the desk on this one. There's only one player that you can confidently start on the Vikings, and it's Kyle Rudolph. We've said it all year long, so I'm glad he really comes through for you. 9 for 122 with 2 touchdowns. I mean, if you are in your championship matchup and you are starting Kyle Rudolph, I am very proud of you because you are one of the great fantasy minds of all time. Stephon Diggs does catch a touchdown pass here, but it was literally the moment Darius Slay left the game. For just a second, they were like, oh, great, we can throw to Diggs now, and then never again. Dalvin Cook, a decent but not inspiring game. Adam Thielen, 80 yards receiving. Kirk Cousins does throw 3 touchdowns. What do you want to talk about here, Tex?
I mean, Kirk Cousins is mediocre. I mean, like, the thing is like this Minnesota defense is too good. They're throwing it to waste. Like, you would think that, you know, with Kirk Cousins, the money that he got, with the guaranteed money, the solid running backs in Dalvin Cook, Latavius Murray, the like awesome wide receiver like the combination of Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, you would think that this team is set up for a Super Bowl run, but every time you watch them, you just walk away disappointed. You're like, what went wrong? And it all goes back to Kirk Cousins. I know that he completed 21 of 28 passes for 253 yards and 3 touchdowns. I liked him as a tournament play today. However, 44 of those yards and a touchdown came on a Hail Mary pass that Kyle Rudolph literally just jumped in the air and there was nobody within like 2 feet of him on a Hail Mary. I don't know how that happens, but Kyle Rudolph, I mean, you weren't playing him. I mean, let's be real about it. Unless you like absolutely had to.
You never know, buddy. All right. You never know how people make it to their championships. But I agree. And frankly, as a Jets fan, and we'll talk about that game shortly, I could not be happier that Kirk Cousins did not really give our team a second look and instead went to the Vikings, because I'm much happier with the future of our QB position than if we had Kirk Cousins, who, again, I expected a lot from this year. I liked him. I really thought in that system he would really do well, and he's just been underwhelming the entire time. I'm glad he had a good game here, but as you said, one of the touchdowns was not really to his credit. And again, he's just been far too inconsistent. That's
the thing. If you watch the Vikings games, I know a lot of people don't have time to watch all the games. I get that. But I'm telling you, I've watched the games, and Kirk Cousins, his final stat lines might not look that bad, but I'm telling you, he hasn't been good. He's the reason that their team is not like beating everyone, because their defense has been awesome.
And if you do play into Week 17, they host the Bears next week, so he's not going to be an attractive option there. On the other side of the ball, the Lions, like, I did not watch this game closely, but did Matthew Stafford leave with an injury? Did he re-injure his back, or did they just put Matt Castle in because the game was over?
I think they're going to try and say that something about an injury, but I want to say that he was basically just pulled just because like there was no point in keeping him on the field.
All right, what is the future for Matthew Stafford and the Lions?
I mean, Kenny Golladay looks bright. Marvin Jones is going to be there, but yeah. I don't know, man. Like, let's be real about this, though. They look like a different offense with Stafford, with Kerryon Johnson on the field, with Golden Tate, with Marvin Jones, with Kenny Golladay. Like, they looked like a better offense with those guys in the field. LeGarrette Blount, it's more worried about Matt Patricia because it's, like, stuck in his ways. Like, why was LeGarrette Blount getting more carries than Zach Zenner again today? Like, how many times do you have to witness this? Like, how many times do you have to witness LeGarrette Blount run for 2 yards a carry? And then he fumbled, and he dropped 2 passes. And it's like, this guy is just not good. And I mean, we knew that when he went there. I knew he wouldn't fit behind this offensive line. And they continue to, like, Matt Patricia, like, is his bold-headedness, like, whatever it is, like, is that going to prevent this team from reaching new heights? Might be. I mean, maybe he fires Jim Bob Cooter this offseason because the offense looked terrible without their playmakers in it. I don't know. Oh, God. The only person that, I mean, Golladay obviously looks good, but Marvin Jones does cap his upside. I think Kerryon Johnson is someone that is definitely someone to look forward to because the Lions offensive line did take a step forward this year. For the most part, over the second half, they've been meh. I don't know, man. This team, I just don't like Matt Patricia as a head coach.
No, he certainly had a poor rookie season for a coach, without a doubt. He made several questionable decisions, and frankly, you can't make your team practice in the snow when you play, indoors. That's just a bad rookie move. I think, Stafford, for me, honestly, I always think about this when I think about quarterbacks because I root for a team that has basically never had a franchise quarterback. As a Lions fan, I would feel just not good about having Matthew Stafford because Stafford is by far definitely good enough to be your franchise QB, but probably not good enough to win you a Super Bowl, right? And you're just kind of, that's the guy who sticks with your franchise for 10 or 12 years and doesn't allow you to take that next level.
I'm torn on that one because, I mean, I've obviously seen a lot of Stafford, and I think he is actually talented. I just feel like the offense is stagnant, and I think they've lost their identity. I think they've drafted poorly in terms of the positions that they needed in the past, like bringing in Amir Abdullah when you had Theo Riddick, a similar type running back on the roster. I mean, like, I just felt like the two roles like conflicted each other. And then it's like, you know, LeGarrette Blount signing him, and it's like, what are you doing? And now it's like trading away Golden Tate when I mean, that was like the white flag, right? They waved the white flag early in the season. I think that lost interest for all Lions players. If you play in that offense, you're like, wait, you just traded away one of our, like, for a future draft pick.
Except they traded for Snacks Harrison. So I mean, I don't really know exactly what they were doing at any point during the season, frankly.
Yeah, but it was conflicting because it's like you felt like, okay, if you trade for him, wasn't he on like, didn't he have like 1 year left on his deal or something like that, or two?
Right, exactly. I believe so. So are you going for it or are you not going for it? What are you doing? I had no idea.
Exactly. It's you have to go full Sashi Brown. You have to go full Browns and say we're just acquiring a bunch of draft picks. But they didn't even do that. So it's just like, I don't know, man. And I want to give props to the Cardinals right now because like the reports came out earlier, or I should say late last night, that Steve Wilkes, that it's reported that he's probably going to lose his job at the end of the year. I'm not rooting for anybody to lose their job, but I didn't necessarily like the hire when it happened. And I've been vocal about that. But I think it's like a team. I don't think it's fair to a head coach to say that, you know, I get 1 year to, like, with a young franchise, with a bad offensive line, with a hurt starter, so many things. Like, but the thing is, ultimately, if I'm a Cardinals fan, I'm pretty happy about that. Like, like just saying like, okay, we tried the Wilkes thing, we tried the whole new defensive mind thing, and it just didn't work. I have to give them props because I don't think we're going to see the same thing with Detroit.
Yeah, no, I am inclined to agree there. I think, you know, when you're in a situation like that, making a bold and strong move is the right call. But my guess is Matt Patricia is going to be the coach for quite a while, which does not look like a good investment at the moment. But you never know.
Hey, you could be the Raiders.
That's true. It could always be the Raiders. That should be their tagline. At the Lions, at least we're not the Raiders. Colts 28, Giants 27. Really exciting game here, and the Colts do pull it out in the end. Ooh. Andrew Luck has a pretty good game, 357 yards and 2 touchdowns with an interception. T.Y. Hilton again comes through, 7 catches for 138 yards. Eric Ebron does leave the game with a concussion here, so if you do play into Week 17, there's a chance he won't be available at the Titans. Monitor that. But what about Marlon Mack? What is your opinion here? He has a monster game in a tough matchup against the Cowboys, and although he scores a touchdown here, just 12 for 34 on the ground, despite it being a really good matchup.
Yeah, definitely. He lost a carry to Nyheim Hines in the goal line. Almost made me lose my mind because I played Marlon Mack in DFS as well. And he's just really a game script dependent running back. I just felt like this game was going to go a lot differently. You know, you have the Giants defense who traded away Snacks Harrison. They were without Landon Collins, their Pro Bowl safety. They were without Alex Ogletree today. So it's like there's so much that they were missing that it's like, okay, you know, the Colts they're at home. They're 10-point favorites. They're going to walk in this game. But the Giants walked out to a 14-point lead early. And I'm like, oh my God. There's only one survivor that I took part in. We started basically everybody. we started in like week 4 after that whole Vikings debacle because like everybody was out. But I was the only person left along with one other guy. And I had the Colts today as my survivor pick. And fortunately they pulled it out. But another team that I really wanted them to give Andrew Luck a wide receiver, considering they had all the picks from the Jets that they did. I think they had 3 second-round picks in this draft. I felt like they were going to get a wide receiver for him. I feel like now it's like to the point where it's like, okay, we're down to Dontrell Inman and Zach Pascal. You know, they've passed Ryan Grant. You know, I know they have some injuries and they're waiting for, you know, like some of the rookies that they drafted this year to come back, but they have to get Andrew Luck a weapon, right? I mean, without question. And again, because part of it is they have addressed so many of the deficiencies that we've talked about with the Colts for years, right? Defense looks good. Offensive line
is stellar. The defense is much improved. You got to get another guy to play opposite T.Y. Hilton for sure, and that's really all you need to essentially turn this team into a powerhouse, as far as I'm concerned. So I am excited to see that going forward, and I hope they really do focus on that area in the offseason. For the Giants, no Odell Beckham again. Saquon Barkley held to just 43 yards rushing on 21 carries. He does find the end zone. He gets 34 yards receiving. Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram have pretty good games without OBJ. Is there anything you want to talk about here from the Giants side of the ball?
Sterling Shepard's frustrating, man. You know, with OBJ out the last few weeks, I wanted to play him, and I felt like he was going to get targeted a lot, and he did, but he just wasn't doing anything with the targets. He didn't appear like he was playing 100% ever since getting injured in the Bears game, which looked like a kidney injury. But anyways, he came back and obviously has a big game today. Probably helps no one because, I mean, if you were starting Sterling Shepard, you probably weren't here. But yeah, my biggest issue here is like Eli Manning and what the Giants do. I feel like they missed a golden opportunity to use his poor play earlier in the year to see what Kyle Lauletta could do. But now they're in this weird spot where they're going into a draft and they don't know what they have in Lauletta because, he didn't play at all. You could say that you like him as a prospect, but I mean, do you really want to go into a season with him as your starter? I don't.
Eli Manning is your 2019 starter, dude. There's no way.
Unfortunately, I think that is the case, and it's like we're going to do the same exact thing with the Giants again next year. Manning's not as bad as some people think he is, but he's terrible under pressure. He's not mobile at all. He's essentially Tom Brady, a guy that's beat him twice in the Super Bowl, because I know some people are going to be like, did you just compare him to Tom Brady? But while watching those two quarterbacks today, that was my takeaway, was that Brady, when he feels pressure, he just either falls down or he just throws the ball at the ground. And that's what Eli Manning does. So, I mean, Brady, yes, is slightly better, but it's not much of a difference. So, I mean, are you okay with that? If you're a Giants fan, I know you're not a Giants fan, but would you be okay with Eli Manning being the quarterback and you building some other pieces and not drafting a quarterback again?
I think it depends. I haven't really studied the college quarterbacks in this class, but it really depends on what the other options are right now. I do think at this point that you are correct. That I don't think Manning is just this complete disaster that everyone made him out to be early in the season. He did play terribly, but he's just had no offensive line the whole year, and he's not good under pressure. You can win games with Eli Manning if you have to. I would much prefer to be looking to the future, but at this point, I can't come out there and be like, Eli Manning cannot be our quarterback next year if I were a Giants fan. I'd say it would, right?
That's how I feel. It's like, unless you feel like you're competing for a Super Bowl, you have to move forward. You have to find a franchise quarterback, and you're never going to do that if you keep trotting Manning out there. And that's what I said. I don't think he's the worst player in the world, but I don't think this team is a Super Bowl contender, and I think they've missed an opportunity to see what they have in Lauletta, and I'm curious to know if they put him out there for Week 17, just to show fans what they have.
Yeah, they should, obviously, but, who knows what they're going to do at this point. Jaguars 17, Dolphins 7. Now, Tags, I'm really going to beg you, we always do this. We talk so much sort of in the beginning, so I'm going to recommend that we skip this game, but I am going to give you the highlights. Blake Bortles relieved Cody Kessler, and they combined to pass for 145 yards. No receiver in the game on either team had more than 45 yards receiving. No runner on either team had more than 47 yards rushing, and despite the absence of Frank Gore, Kenyon Drake saw 6 carries, 2 more than Kalen Ballage and Brandon Bolden. Is there anything else you want to say about this game other than gross?
Yep, I said don't start a Dolphins running back this week, and I stood by that. But Fournette, people are down on Fournette. I do want to say that if you can buy Fournette at a discount, I would do that. The reason I'm saying that is because they're going to have a new quarterback next year. That's almost like a given. And Fournette, the offensive line, most people are looking at it as Fournette. And granted, some of it's on Fournette. He hasn't played well either, but it's a bad offense that doesn't have any threat at quarterback, and they were missing, now at the end of this game, they were missing 4 of 5 starting offensive linemen. So I would trade, if you can get Fournette for cheaper than he's been, I would look to make a trade for him.
I think that is a great takeaway. I too feel relatively confident in Fournette's future as a whole. This year, and he scored today, but it was certainly disappointing. But overall, in the future, I definitely think that people have mostly soured on him, and I'm not quite as down on him as everybody else seems to be. Patriots 24. Bills 12, you mentioned it. Tom Brady throws for just 126 yards and 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, I believe. 1 touchdown. Julian Edelman, Sony Michel scores. James White scores. Rob Gronkowski, 3 targets, 0 catches. Tell me what you want to talk about here. Nothing looks good for the Patriots right now.
The run game looked good today. Sony Michel got back on track. They cleared some holes for him. He looked good. James White, Rex Burkhead, those guys were involved, and that's what they needed to do to win this game. Honestly, I just felt like they were a worse team when they dropped back to pass. Tom Brady didn't look great. It's a good defense against Buffalo, so I don't think that I never expected Brady to have a good game, but he does not look good. He's never looked as uncomfortable as I see him now. And he doesn't have that go-to guy. Julian Edelman has somewhat become that instead of Gronk, because Gronk just doesn't look right, man. The guy just looks like he's
got an elephant on his back, man.
Yeah, like a clunky robot just running around the field. And it's before it's I don't know, man. It's also sad to try and put into words without, ticking off Patriots fans, but it just doesn't look good.
You are so reticent to make Patriots fans mad. Every time you want to criticize Tom Brady, you always sort of do it.
Oh, I do. Of course I do. And someone actually tweeted me today. I didn't even say anything about anything. He's like, remember when you thought that Aaron Rodgers was better than Tom Brady? And I'm like, Remember what? Because it's still true.
That may have been my 5-year-old, by the way. He gets very mad when I suggest it. But
No, but seriously, like, if you're a Patriots fan, I understand moving away from Tom Brady is like, even the touchdown to Julian Edelman, by the way, was not really a touchdown pass. It was more on Edelman rolling over a defender and not touching the ground than anything. But I think this is Peyton Manning-esque in terms of the end of his career. Like, I remember we got to the Super Bowl with Manning that year, and it was like, you almost just wanted him to get benched because you didn't want him to lose the Super Bowl. And their defense was playing so good. Is that where we're at with Brady? Where it's like, I don't think so. I don't think we're like DEFCON 5 where like Manning was in his final season. But man, Brady doesn't look good.
he looks terrible. And at the same time, if you told me right now that they're going to win the Super Bowl this year, I would not be overly shocked.
I wouldn't be shocked either.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the thing that he does. He has these stretches where he looks more than mortal, and then he just comes out and he just dominates. So we'll see. Certainly this is the most prolonged stretch that I've seen him look absolutely pedestrian. And he, again, with Gronkowski so limited, and now there's no Josh Gordon, he's just has very few weapons to go to right now. So it's not a great situation. And when they win the Super Bowl, you and I can look back at this and be like, whoops, sorry about that, Pats fans. Don't yell at us. Anything you want to talk about here on the Bills side of the ball?
No. Josh Allen he's Josh Allen. We know who he is at this point. He only ran for 30 yards against the Patriots, which is kind of disappointing, actually. He had a less than stellar fantasy day. Robert Foster, he kind of is who he thought he was too, where he's a deep threat. He's going to catch some balls. But Isaiah McKenzie, he was hurt in this game, ended up coming back, whatever. It's just a very inconsistent team. You do not want to tie your fantasy hopes and dreams to players on a team led by Josh Allen, because if he has a bad day like he did today, you're stuck in a crap shoot. And it's just like you can't deal with those ups and downs in fantasy, especially like during the week 16.
Yeah, 100%. Avoid all Bills, which is basically what most fantasy owners have been doing all season long. Packers 44, Jets 38 in overtime. Another fantastic Dan Harris outcome. Sam Darnold looks fantastic. The Jets blow the game, maintain their draft position. Todd Bowles is another step closer to the door. Just fantastic day for me, and a fantastic day, frankly, for all fantasy owners. Aaron Rodgers with an incredible 442 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. Jamal Williams fills in more than capably for Aaron Jones, 156 total yards and a touchdown. Devontae Adams saves his day with the late score, 71 yards. And on the other side of the ball, Elijah McGuire, only 35 yards rushing, but he does score, plus 50 yards receiving and the score. Robbie Anderson comes through again, 9 catches, 140 yards and a touchdown. And Chris Herndon, 6 catches, 82 yards and a touchdown. What do you want to say about this game?
Yeah, Robbie Anderson's someone that people are going to have trouble trying to evaluate next year, because they're going to remember his failures from early in the season. But then you have to look at that end and think that there's something here between him and Darnold, that they started to develop a connection even down the field. Quincy Enunwa and him had that earlier in the year, so I don't think you could take it to the bank and say it's going to happen going forward. But it's definitely a franchise that the value can change with the head coaching. I've heard that Bowles might hold on to that job, which is just crazy.
Stop saying that. Stop saying that right now. I will end this podcast right now.
Will you stop being a Jets fan if they retain Bowles?
No, because I do not have control over that. Because if I did, my fandom would probably look much different in all sports. I would be utterly disappointed. I don't think I assume they're going to retain Mac, and I can't believe that he is going to have one shot and be like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to roll with Bowles. You've got Darnold. Everybody knows what the right move is. You have to bring in a young offensive-minded coach. If they do retain him, I will be incredibly upset, but I will still just cry with my Jets jersey on every Sunday.
Yeah, and maybe Jamal Williams isn't as bad as people think he is. Aaron Jones is better, but Jamal Williams also isn't bad. He's shown the ability to handle a workhorse running back, like a role. And, last year in 8 games, by the way, Aaron Rodgers only played for one of them, so they were an elite offense. He finishes the RB9 during that time, and then you watch him go out there today. 155 total yards or 156 total yards and a touchdown. Last week he scored against the Bears, so he's out there doing some work. I'm really curious to see what the starting roster looks like for the Packers next year. I'm curious to see who they bring in for a head coach, because I'd imagine they're going to have people lined up for that job, to coach Aaron Rodgers. And I would hope that they bring in somebody offensive-minded, but, I have no idea what the Packers are going to do. They held on to McCarthy a lot longer than they should have, to be honest with you.
You have to think they give Rodgers a huge input.
They should have him part of the interview process, to be honest with you.
100%.
He's tied to your franchise. You have to keep him happy, and I get it. Oh, no one player is bigger than the team. The quarterback should have input. Tom Brady should have had input if they were going to bring in Josh Gordon. What do you think? And stuff over that. So, I'm all about a team and creating unity, and it's you need your quarterback on board.
Absolutely. Eagles 32, Texans 30. Just a really exciting game here. Demaryius Thomas tears his Achilles. He's going to miss the rest of the season, which is sad. I think this might be his second Achilles tear. I think I read that, but that's too bad. He's been a solid player for a long time. Hopefully he'll be able to recover. This game's all about the quarterbacks, man. Nick Foles, 35 of 49 for 471 yards and 4 touchdowns with an interceptions. Deshaun Watson, 339 yards passing and 2 touchdowns plus 2 rushing touchdowns and 49 yards. What do you want to say here?
Oh, here we go again. I don't know, man. Nick Foles looks like a different quarterback from one week to the next, and today he looked really good. And
does his success, out of curiosity, does his success have any impact on how you view Carson Wentz? I mean, he basically comes into the same system and looks great. Does that make you think any less of how Carson Wentz would be outside of this system or anything like that?
Not really. I actually like Carson Wentz a lot. And like some people, like we had a conversation on the one podcast about who you'd take in their career, Bobby and I, and it was like going forward, who would you rather have, Carson Wentz or Baker Mayfield? And a lot of people said, oh, because I said Baker Mayfield, it means I hate Carson Wentz. I don't hate him at all. I just think Baker's going to be great. I mean, the system does matter to an extent, but I mean, this match, like Nick Foles had no pressure on him most of the day. Like he was able to sit back, sit tight. Like he had, I think it was 50 dropbacks. He was sacked once. If Houston does not get a pass rush on you, you can throw all over that secondary. They just don't have the talent in the secondary to contain defenses, and that's what you've seen recently. That pass rush has slowed down, and that's why that secondary is breaking down, and they're losing football games. So, I mean, I don't want to take too much away from it, but I'm not going to take away any shine from Nick Foles. I mean, 471 yards, 4 touchdowns. I'm not gonna rag on you, man. You played well. You did what you were supposed to do. I can't say it takes away anything from Carson Wentz though, just because like I've watched them both play football, and I feel like Foles is more of like a guy that he relies on his players to make plays for him, and then I think that Carson Wentz is more of a guy that sets up his players for success.
Yeah, well, the Eagles do stay alive in the playoff race here, and the Texans, I believe they fell out of the number 2 spot here with the loss and the Patriots win, but frankly, I haven't checked any of that, so we'll have to see. But it was a very exciting game. DeAndre Hopkins does come through. He looked a little gimpy in the warm-ups, but 9 for 104, so that was good to see. Falcons 24, Panthers 10. Cam Newton was shut down. Taylor Heineke comes in, throws 3 interceptions, briefly leaves with an injury, but comes back in. Christian McCaffrey continues to be unstoppable, 178 total yards. Anything to say here on the Panther side of the ball?
33 touches, man. I mean,
it's never going to stop, dude.
That's going to be something we have to watch this offseason. Does Carolina bring in somebody to split that workload? Because they obviously just didn't feel good enough for C.J. Anderson, who they cut. Didn't feel good enough about Cameron Sardis-Payne, any of these guys, to get more touches behind Christian McCaffrey. And I don't know if that's by design, but we know that running backs that see this many touches, they tend to wear down, and McCaffrey's not the biggest guy.
He's a little dude. This is crazy.
That's the thing, is like he's played so much better than I give him credit for, and like honestly, you could say that he's like in the conversation for fantasy MVP. Like I'll give it up to Christian McCaffrey. Even playing well in this game without Cam Newton, which I thought would negatively affect him, because when you take a mobile quarterback out of the game, like Cam, even though Heineke has mobility as well, but Cam is a different breed. You need a game plan for that. But I'm really curious to see if Carolina brings in another running back. I mean, for me, in Dynasty, and I know people are going to like call me crazy because you don't trade away studs, this and that. I do. I'm willing to, especially at running back. Like if you were to trade Le'Veon Bell 2 years ago, you'd be really happy right now. I think Christian McCaffrey, this is your sell high point. And I'm not saying that he's going to be bad. I still have him as like a top 7, top 8 Dynasty running back. But I think this is your sell high moment.
I mean, I think in the end, I can't imagine that his value will ever be higher than it is right now. So
exactly, that's the point.
Right. In that sense, he's a sell high, but everybody can essentially be a sell high at this point. And yes, of course, if Christian McCaffrey repeats this next year, it's just out. It's crazy. As you said, there is no way he should get this many touches. It just doesn't make any sense.
I don't think any running back should, to be honest.
Exactly. And nobody should, and especially someone of his size, despite how successful he's been. So as you said, my guess is next year they're going to bring in somebody who they have more confidence in, I guess, to split work with him a little bit. On the other side of the ball, Matt Ryan, 3 more touchdown passes quietly, the number 2 QB on the season. Julio Jones guts it out again, was questionable coming in. Only 4 catches for 28 yards, does find the end zone. Calvin Ridley and Mohamed Sanu also score touchdowns, and Tevin Coleman doesn't get that much work, and he leaves, I believe, with an injury. Brian Hill comes in, 8 carries for 115 yards. Anything on the Falcons?
Oh, no. I mean, this is a tale of 2 teams that literally have nothing to play for. Carolina is out. Calvin Ridley, he's flashed at times this year, but he's always going to be second fiddle to Julio Jones. Like, where do you draft Calvin Ridley next year? Do you feel comfortable with him as a wide receiver 3? Because I don't. I feel like Matt Ryan had the second most efficient year of his career. Like, his numbers were really, really, really good overall. But at the same time, Calvin Ridley, even with those giant numbers, Calvin Ridley was very inconsistent. He had one gigantic week that is going to prop up his numbers for the whole season. I think he's a phenomenal receiver, but I still feel like with Julio Jones there, his upside is limited. And because of that, I think he'll be overdrafted because I think people expect him to take a step forward in year 2. But Calvin Ridley was already like the most pro-ready receiver coming into the NFL this year. So where do you view Ridley like next year? Do you think he belongs in the top 36, or are you more like, nah, I'll let somebody else draft him?
I feel like it's going to be borderline. I feel like, when we talk about top 36, I'm kind of like, maybe. That was basically my reaction to it. I don't think he's somebody who's clearly going to be like, I'm going to draft this guy as my wide receiver 3 and I'm going to feel really comfortable doing it. No, he's not going to be there. But at the same time, he's not going to be somebody who I avoid. I don't think he's going to be somebody where he's going to be drafted at a position where I'm going to be like, I'm not willing to pay that price. I mean, he does have a lot of upside. And with another, offseason sort of getting comfortable, whatever system they have, whether or not they keep Steve Sarkisian, it's going to be, if I'd like to own some shares of Ridley next year. I just don't feel like I'm going to be doing it if it means I have to go in counting on him to be a reliable wide receiver 3, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think exactly what you said there is how I feel. And I think that you would target him in best ball formats, and that's it.
Right. I think that's certainly an area to target him. But in season-long leagues, I'll probably own some shares, but I won't be overly invested.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, Tevin Coleman's a free agent after this year. So you're looking at Devonta Freeman, Ito Smith, and Brian Hill on the roster. So, I mean, Devonta Freeman's somebody that people are going to forget about. If they don't make any changes to the roster, where would you draft Devonta Freeman next year? As a high-end RB2?
Yeah. I mean, I guess a high-end RB2. Yeah, mid RB2, high RB2, I guess. Yeah, I think that's about where I'd be. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think about that, and I'm like, Ito Smith is probably going to walk into that Tevin Coleman role, right? And like Tevin Coleman, it was like a guy that if he didn't score a touchdown, he busted. So, I mean, yeah, I'd probably say that because they're going to be a good offense. The offensive line will get healthy over the offseason. They might even add to it. Like the success comes from that. Like that offensive line, once they started building that, Matt Ryan started looking better and better. So I feel like, yes, that Devonta Freeman should be in that high-end RB2 conversation. And I think you're going to be looking at him as like maybe a value in the middle of the third round.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me. I'm doing this on the fly, so I'm trying to think about where it is. But yeah, I think that about sounds right. I like it, Tags. Way to be.
Hey.
Way to be. We'll look back in this episode next year. Rams 31, Cardinals 9. We have talked about CJ Anderson. He really just, essentially, if you did pick him up and you really, had the stomach to start him, he certainly rewarded you. 20 carries, 167 yards, and a touchdown. Nothing much else here from the Rams offense. It was not a game that was crazy in doubt. Robert Woods scores a touchdown. Anything else you want to touch on with that team?
Yeah, Robert Woods has been the model of consistency. Like, there's no game this year since week 1 where he's totaled less than like 61 yards in a game. He's catching tons of balls, like playing in the slot for that role for Cooper Kupp. He had 89 yards and a touchdown through the air. He also he ran for a touchdown today. So he turned out to be one of the better values in DFS. But ultimately, if you guys played CJ Anderson, congrats, because seriously, like that performance is bigger and better than I think anybody thought it would be. John Kelly adds in 49 yards, but it's not nearly the performance that anybody had hoped. If you were waiting for Gurley and you had to choose between one of these two. And, just so you guys know, I played John Kelly in one of my leagues where I could have picked up CJ Anderson instead of him. I did the Kelly thing. So it's not just, I give you guys the advice that I would use myself. So this is one I do feel bad about because I wish that I could have done more. But unfortunately, it's also one of those I know I couldn't have done more because nobody really truly knew what was going to happen.
No, this was an incredibly difficult position for fantasy owners to be in. And if you started Anderson, great. If you went with Kelly, you should not feel bad. Really, the number of times where, word leaks, oh, this guy's going to be the starter or this guy's going to run, and then it just doesn't really happen, especially in a situation like this where the guy has barely been there. He barely knew the offense, so don't beat yourself up about it too bad. On the other side of the ball, just nothing good. Josh Rosen, again, looks terrible, 12 of 23 for 87 yards. He gets spared a fumble and a return for a touchdown when it was overturned on review, a little surprising. David Johnson does find the end zone, but, just 67 total yards. Larry Fitzgerald, 53 yards receiving. He does have a passing touchdown, so he had
more fantasy points throwing the ball than Josh Rosen did.
Yeah, there you go. But do you think this is the last year for Fitz?
I think it should be, unless he goes to a different team. I mean, I think he still has something left in the tank, like he continues to go out there and do it. But if he wants to play for the Cardinals, retire, man. Because, again, you're going to be going through another coaching change. You have a young quarterback who doesn't look great. You have an offensive line that needs to be entirely rebuilt. The secondary has some holes. You have some unhappy players. I don't know, man. I just feel like the Steve Wilkes experiment is over, and I don't think that Larry Fitzgerald should go through another coaching change at this point in his career. It's like play for a title or don't play. It's unfortunate because I think Fitz, again, I still think he has some gas left in the tank, but no, I think he retires.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And again, I don't think there's much that we can take away from this game from the Cardinals side of the ball, because I do think there will be a new coaching staff, and with the young QB, it's going to be a new system. No idea, other than I think you and I have both expressed this. With the way Josh Rosen has played, regardless of the coaching staff, it does not fill you with optimism for his long-term outlook. All right, Bears 14, 49ers 9. Basically, every single player on the 49ers leaves with an injury. Matt Breida does his usual thing where he plays and unfortunately leaves the game with an injury. Dante Pettis, I believe, hurt his MCL. He's already been declared out, my understanding, for Week 17, if you do play into that. And they play against the Rams next week. So if you were relying on him, make sure you avoid it. Let's start with your boys, Tags. I mean, Jordan Howard does score a touchdown. Mitch Trubisky throws one. What do you want to say about him?
It's a pretty ugly game overall on both sides of the ball. Like there was no big takeaways where you should feel like great about any of these players. Trubisky, on paper, good game, and I think he played a solid game. Nothing extraordinary. 25 of 29 passing, 246 yards, a touchdown. He made a weird lateral that I'm pretty sure he got charged with the fumble on. Like he threw it backwards to Tariq Cohen, hit him. The ball hit him in the hands. Like he probably should have caught it, but at the same time, it was a wobbly ball. It was just a weird play. But anyways, this was just an ugly football game. Like there's really not much you could take away from it. There was a fight in it. Anthony Miller got ejected. Josh Bellamy got ejected. But, George Kittle, 7 catches, 74 yards. The biggest so Kittle, the better performance against the Bears, obviously without Eddie Jackson, that's going to hurt them. And that came into play in this game. But the biggest thing was Dante Pettis going down very early in that game. He had 5 targets, I want to say, in like the first quarter alone. Went down, was tackled awkwardly. I think it's a knee injury, but he was ruled out for the game and didn't come back, which I know that hurt a lot of fantasy teams. That hurt a lot of DFS players. But as a franchise, I mean, I think you're pretty happy with where the team's moving. This is another team where I feel like they have to get a number 1 receiver. I thought they would in this draft. I thought they would draft one or at least snag one in free agency. But the 49ers were pretty quiet on that front. So, going forward, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to return. What are they going to do with Nick Mullins? Are they going to trade him maybe to the Patriots? Maybe they go back, send somebody back there. It's tough to say, but Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the starter. But the question is, where is Nick Mullins next year? And does he stay on the roster, or do they trade C.J. Beathard? What do they do? And then Matt Breida also hurt in this game. He was bent somewhat awkwardly. So it was just an ugly football game, man. There's not much you could take away from this one. Tariq Cohen, I think he's the one that most people would walk away disappointed from, because he was the one that I think people started confidently.
Yeah, Cohen has always been a guy who, when I own him in certain spots, I've been starting him, but it's just always felt uncomfortable. I've always ranked him as somebody who I should start, but these types of games happen, right? And especially where a game where the Bears are, for the most part, in control. It was a close game, so it's not like they ran away with it. But, there are these games, and that lateral play was, I do not know who gets charged. I guess it was Trubisky who gets charged with the fumble on that, but that was just a bizarre play a little bit. But anyway, yeah, I agree. There's really not too many takeaways that we could do here for the 49ers. Once Garoppolo comes back, Jerick McKinnon is going to be back. It's going to look different. I agree. And I'm sure they know they've got to go out there and get another wide receiver. So I expect they will in the offseason. Our final game, and this one was still going on when we started, and the result is different than when we left. The Saints 31, Steelers 28. Breeze disappoints a little bit at home. It's a tough defense. He throws for 326 yards, just 1 touchdown. It's mostly done on the ground here with Kamara, who rushes for only 23 yards, but does score 2 touchdowns. Mark Ingram also scores a touchdown. And Michael Thomas has a big day, as usual, catches almost all of his many targets, 13 targets, 11 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. What do you want to say about the Saints?
The Saints, they look better just because the run game got better, but the big takeaway here is Teron Armstead. So the left tackle for Drew Brees has been out the last couple weeks, and you've seen Brees struggle. The combination of him missing and being on the road, I think that added up. But Teron Armstead hurt himself earlier in this game. He ended up returning with a brace on his arm and then looked terrible, and then they ended up pulling him out of the game again. So if he's not healthy, that's something to watch to go into the playoffs, because if they can't protect Drew Brees, he's in big trouble. Because a lot of these teams that are going to the playoffs, like, they have a pass rush. You talk about the Cowboys, the Seahawks, the Bears, like a lot of the teams they're going to run into can get after the quarterback. So that's something to watch, because they need to get this run game going, but it hasn't. They rushed for just 57 yards as a team today. I know they had 3 rushing touchdowns, but against the Steelers, that's the 57 yards on 19 carries isn't exactly great. So it's good to see them get Ted Ginn back. That was a part of their offense they were missing. Now Traquan Smith kind of goes back to a role player, which is, I think, what he's destined to do as a rookie, it seems. If you had Brees in your lineup the last couple weeks, it's most likely that you weren't in a fantasy championship. But so I don't know if most people had to worry about Drew Brees this week, but it was semi disappointing for the matchup he had and for as many points as they scored.
Yeah, and what's interesting with the Saints is they continue to win, and they've now, I believe, locked up home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and they are a very good football team. I don't mean to disparage them in any way, but I feel like, frankly, they seem much less scary now than they did 4 weeks ago. Even though they've kept winning, whether it's the injuries to the offensive line, whatever it is, injuries, they do get Ginn back, but they've really struggled to fill that second wide receiver spot. Whatever it is, they just don't, it doesn't feel like, we cannot go into that place and win now, where I feel like 4 weeks ago you would think there's just no way to win in New Orleans. So it's an interesting team, but we'll have to see. As for the Steelers, I mean, their playoff lives are basically on the brink right now. Roethlisberger with a big game. He does attempt 50 throws. He throws for 380 yards and 3 touchdowns. Antonio Brown with a huge day, 19 targets, 14 receptions, 185 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Juju Smith-Schuster, after telling his fantasy owners that everything would be okay, 15 targets, 11 receptions, 115 yards. And Jalen Samuels also catches a receiving touchdown. Takeaways from the Steelers.
I said before that I felt like the Steelers, their offense matched up extremely well with the Saints, because typically Marshawn Lattimore is one-on-one with the top receiver, and if there's the number 2, they'll bracket that guy. But with Antonio Brown, it's difficult to not keep 2 safeties deep and worry about him beating your cornerback over the top. But they trusted Marshawn Lattimore in man coverage a lot of the time, and Antonio Brown made him pay. There's not many cornerbacks in the NFL that Antonio Brown can't beat one-on-one. So it's not really a shock to see this finishing line with him. We saw Mike Evans dominate Marshawn Lattimore earlier in the year. So, I mean, it can be done, and people continually underestimate the effect that Antonio Brown has on Juju Smith-Schuster, because teams they have to start shading a safety that way, and it doesn't allow them to bracket Juju Smith-Schuster, and they're using Smith-Schuster in a variety of different ways in the slot, and it's really difficult to bracket a player like that. But both of those guys walk away with a big performance. That's where the performances have gone against the Saints this year. So if you have wide receivers like those guys, it doesn't shock me. It was a little shocking to see Jalen Samuels targeted just 3 times in the passing game, but fortunately he found the end zone for those who started him.
Yeah, without that touchdown, it certainly would have been a disappointing game for Samuels. It's just very funny to look at Antonio Brown, 19 targets, Smith-Schuster, 15 targets. Nobody else had more than 4 targets. So that's basically what the Steelers are at this point when they have to throw. But fantasy owners are not complaining for the most part. Well, that is it for today's show. Before we go, I want to remind everyone about the David Johnson signed helmet giveaway. Just go to fantasypros.com/contest. I hope everybody has enjoyed these recap shows as much as Tags and I have. And really, I think I speak for both of us when I say that we could not do this without all of you guys listening and coming back each week. So thank you, and I hope you continue to listen throughout the offseason. So for the final time in 2018 on our Sunday night podcast, on behalf of everyone here at Fantasy Pros, thanks for listening and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.